When I saw him pull out his phone and start scrolling, my heart skipped, not from fear of being caught, but from the dread of what he might find. The messages. The ones I'd forgotten to delete. I reached out, trying to snatch it back, but he was quicker, pulling away with a calm I envied and despised all at once. I watched his face as it changed, line by line, message by message, and felt my world crumble piece by piece. Yes, now he was going to know the truth. But not all of it. His hands trembled as he flipped to the next screen, and I knew the moment was coming, the message that would shatter everything, that would either end us or twist the knife even deeper. Suddenly, his phone vibrated, and a new notification lit up the screen. I saw his face go pale when he read the sender's name. He froze. Didn't even blink. I bit the inside of my cheek, an old nervous habit. My nerves tangled with the horror of what I had done. I could hear his breathing quicken even from 2 meters away. This was what I feared the most because 3 months ago, I made a mistake. A mistake that changed everything forever, and now I didn't know what to do. But let me tell you how it all really began. Before I reveal the secret I've tried so desperately to hide, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from and answer this. Have you ever had a secret so deep you thought you could keep it forever, only to have it slip away? I had spent years wrapped in the comfortable routine of marriage, the kind where days blur and passion dims to a distant memory. It wasn't that we had stopped caring, far from it, but the spark, that raw, electric connection that once set my soul alight, was gone. I found myself craving something I couldn't name, an ache that neither time nor proximity could soothe. My husband was a good man, reliable, kind, but his world revolved around work, deadlines, and polite smiles. Our evenings, once filled with conversation and laughter, became quiet interludes where we sat side by side but miles apart. I told myself it was enough, that love matured into companionship, but inside, a restless whisper grew louder. The moment he left for a business trip, I found myself alone in the house, surrounded by shadows of memories and regrets. The walls felt colder, the silence heavier. That's when he appeared, my husband's best friend. He wasn't someone I'd noticed much before, at least not in the way I did now. There was a quiet confidence in his eyes, a teasing hint of danger that I hadn't realized I was drawn to. He spoke with ease, his laughter light but charged with something beneath the surface. When he asked if I wanted to join him for coffee, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. Our first meeting was casual, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. The way he looked at me, with a mixture of curiosity and knowing, set my heart racing. I caught myself studying the curve of his smile, the way his fingers brushed the rim of the cup. I felt alive and terrified. As I walked home later, the city lights blurred into streaks of color, mirroring the storm inside me. The boundaries I'd carefully built around myself started to crumble with every step. Back home, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, older, tired, but still capable of desire. I chose a dress that hugged my curves, the fabric soft but daring. A subtle perfume, a touch of lipstick, small rebellions against the monotony. I wasn't sure what I was chasing, only that I had to find it before it was too late. His texts came unexpectedly, brief, charged with meaning. Each message a puzzle, a promise, a challenge. I hesitated, knowing the risk, yet unable to resist the pull. The game had begun, and with it, a world that both frightened and exhilarated me. I found myself watching for his car, counting the minutes until he arrived, feeling the pulse of anticipation in my veins. When he finally stepped through the door, the air between us shifted. Words were unnecessary, the silence spoke volumes. The dance had started, delicate and dangerous, and I was already caught in the rhythm. The phone call came out of nowhere. His voice was casual, almost careless, but beneath it, I caught the unmistakable undercurrent of something more, a challenge, perhaps, or an invitation I wasn't sure I was ready to accept. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of what I was about to do pressing down on me like a cold hand. But the emptiness inside me had grown too loud to ignore. I said yes. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, a place where no one knew our names, where the clink of cups and murmurs of strangers created a protective cloak of anonymity. He was already there when I arrived, leaning against the window with that familiar, knowing smile that sent a shiver through me. The air between us was charged, thick with unspoken words and the promise of something forbidden. We talked, but it wasn't the words that mattered. It was the way he looked at me, like he was seeing something I'd long forgotten existed. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for my cup, stealing a glance at him from the corner of my eye. He met my gaze and held it, a spark passing between us that made my pulse quicken. Then, without warning, we kissed. It was brief, a fleeting brush of lips that spoke volumes in its silence. We kissed, and nothing more. The simplicity of that moment was overwhelming, so much unsaid, yet understood. I pulled back, breathless, the taste of him lingering like a secret I wasn't ready to share. Afterwards, the conversation resumed, but with a new texture, layers of irony, subtle teasing, and the kind of honesty that only exists when masks are lowered. He spoke with a confidence that both unsettled and intrigued me, weaving words that hinted at control and a game we were only beginning to play. I felt exposed and alive all at once, caught in a swirl of emotions I had buried beneath years of routine and duty. The thrill of danger was intoxicating, but so was the quiet knowledge that each step we took was a step closer to a line I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. As I left the cafe that evening, the city around me seemed different, more vivid, more dangerous. The streetlights cast long shadows that danced with my thoughts, mirroring the turmoil inside. I wondered how far I was willing to go, and what I was willing to lose. That night, I lay awake, the memory of his touch burning behind my eyes. The world outside was still, but inside me, a storm was gathering, threatening to break free. I wasn't sure where this path would lead, but I knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. The message from my husband came early on a gray Thursday morning, a simple note about his plans for the weekend, a business meeting in a neighboring city that would keep him away longer than usual. At first, it seemed mundane, a mere detail in the routine of our lives. But beneath that simple line, I sensed the widening gap between us. The knowledge of his absence stirred something reckless inside me, a restless urge to reach out to the only person who seemed to awaken anything in my dormant soul. I found myself dialing his number before I could second-guess the impulse. The voice on the other end was calm but expectant, as if he had been waiting for me to cross that invisible line. The decision to meet again wasn't made lightly. Each encounter pulled me deeper into a world of temptation and risk. The tension was a heady mix of excitement and dread, the constant question of whether we would be caught lingering at the edges of every moment. The city outside seemed indifferent to the turmoil inside me. I moved between places, the quiet streets near my home, the sterile office where he worked, the anonymous cafes where our meetings were cloaked in secrecy. Each location was a stage for the unfolding drama, a physical manifestation of my fractured reality. The contrast between the cold walls of my marriage and the warm shadows of this forbidden connection was stark and suffocating. Our conversations that day were laced with double meanings and subtle provocations. His voice was calm, almost teasing, as he tested the limits of what I was willing to accept. I responded with guarded deflections, my heart pounding beneath a veneer of control. We were both playing a dangerous game, each move carefully calculated to elicit a reaction without revealing too much. I caught myself staring out over the city skyline as dusk settled in, the fading light casting long shadows that seemed to echo the doubts growing within me. The contrast between the public spaces we inhabited and the private turmoil I endured was stark and relentless. I was caught between worlds, the life I had built and the one I was risking everything to explore. Despite the risks, despite the questions that haunted me, I found a strange clarity in that day's chaos. The boundaries I once thought absolute were shifting, and with them, my understanding of who I was and what I wanted. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was the intensity of the connection that bound us. As night fell, the weight of the day's revelations settled heavily on my shoulders. I knew that from this point forward, there would be no turning back. The lines between right and wrong, love and betrayal, were blurred beyond recognition. And somewhere deep inside, a part of me welcomed the uncertainty, eager to see where this path would lead, even if it meant losing everything. The day he almost caught us remains etched in my memory with vivid clarity. I had barely settled into the quiet hum of the afternoon when the unexpected sound of the front door opening sent a jolt through me. Time seemed to slow, the air thickening with an electric tension that wrapped itself around every nerve. I glanced toward the window just in time to see his familiar silhouette step into view, my husband, returning earlier than planned. Panic surged through me, sharp and unrelenting. I could feel his presence closing the distance, the seconds stretching interminably as I tried to gather my scattered thoughts. He hadn't noticed us yet, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself the luxury of hope that we might slip unnoticed through the cracks of our precarious reality. The room was charged with silent warnings. His eyes flicked toward us, narrowing as he took in the scene. I met his gaze, a mixture of fear and defiance burning behind my own. There was no way to explain, no words that could undo the weight of this moment. And then, without a word, we kissed. We kissed. It was brief, an exchange heavy with the complexity of unspoken truths and concealed emotions. No more, no less. In that single, fleeting act, the fragile veil of our secrecy seemed to tremble, threatening to unravel completely. The emotions that followed were a tangled mess, shame interlaced with a strange rush of exhilaration, guilt paired with a flicker of daring. I felt the sharp contrast between the safety I'd known and the peril I had willingly embraced. The very walls around me seemed to close in, echoing the turmoil in my chest. My husband's presence was a looming shadow, a reminder of the life I was simultaneously holding onto and slipping away from. The weight of his unspoken questions hung heavily in the air, filling the room with a quiet but undeniable pressure. I watched the subtle changes in his expression, the tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes darted between us and the floor. It was as if he was trying to reconcile two conflicting realities, struggling to make sense of the scene before him without allowing the fracture between us to become irreparable. In those moments, I realized that the game we had been playing was no longer a private one. The boundaries had shifted, and the stakes had risen to a level that left no room for retreat. The illusion of control was slipping through my fingers like sand. As the afternoon light faded, casting long shadows across the room, I felt the fragile threads of our lives intertwining in ways that threatened to bind us in knots impossible to unravel. The risks we had taken were no longer abstract possibilities but urgent realities demanding reckoning. Despite the fear and uncertainty, beneath it all, a quiet determination took root. I knew that whatever came next, the choices I made now would define the course of everything, our marriage, my sense of self, and the tangled web of desires and loyalties I was trapped within. And so, as the evening settled in, I braced myself for what was to come, aware that the line between love and betrayal had never been more blurred, and that crossing it could change everything forever. The proposition was sudden and unexpected, an escape, a chance to leave behind the tightening grip of suspicion and the fragile cage of our lives. He spoke calmly, his words deliberate, suggesting we leave the city and retreat to a place where no one knew our names, no shadows of the past could reach us. The offer was both a promise and a challenge, wrapped in the quiet certainty of someone who believed control was still possible. The idea of leaving was intoxicating. To start anew, far from the prying eyes and whispered doubts that now clouded every corner of my existence. Yet, beneath the allure of fresh beginnings, I felt the gnawing tug of uncertainty. Was I ready to abandon everything I had built, to risk the life I knew for a fragile hope? The question hovered, persistent and unrelenting. We moved between spaces, the cramped confines of my home where every glance held the weight of secrets, the car that became our temporary sanctuary as the city slipped behind us, and the unfamiliar streets of the town that awaited us. Each location was a marker on a journey not just of distance but of transformation, a physical and emotional shift that pulled me deeper into the unknown. Inside me, a storm of emotions raged. Fear tangled with anticipation, regret mingled with resolve. The past clung to me like a shadow, its presence undeniable even as I sought to outrun it. I found myself questioning not just the path ahead, but the very choices that had led me here, the betrayals, the lies, the moments of weakness and strength that had shaped this tangled story. Our conversations were measured, filled with pauses that spoke louder than words. We spoke of plans and possibilities, of what could be left behind and what must be carried forward. Beneath the surface, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the risks, of the fragility of our new beginning and the consequences of the choices we made. The quiet moments between words were charged with tension. I caught myself watching him, trying to read the lines etched on his face, searching for signs of doubt or certainty. His gaze held a mixture of hope and calculation, a reminder that beneath the facade of control, uncertainty still lingered. As the day faded into evening, the weight of the journey settled on my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, marked by shadows and promises alike. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a flicker of hope remained, a fragile belief that perhaps, in this new place, I might find the clarity and freedom I so desperately sought. The city lights twinkled behind us, fading into the distance as we moved forward, leaving behind the familiar and stepping into the unknown. With every mile, the past grew quieter, but the questions remained about who I was, who I wanted to be, and what sacrifices I was willing to make for a chance at something more. The night we spent together was unlike anything I had anticipated. It wasn't a climax or a surrender but rather a quiet reckoning, a moment suspended between past and future, desire and doubt. The evening unfolded slowly, each second laden with the weight of unspoken questions and fragile hopes. The room was dimly lit, shadows casting long patterns across the walls, mirroring the tangled thoughts that raced through my mind. I was acutely aware of every breath, every glance, the subtle movements that spoke louder than words. The space between us was charged, a fragile bridge spanning the chasm of uncertainty we both navigated. We spent the night together. No more, no less. Those words echoed in my mind, not a confession, not a promise, but a simple fact carrying complex meanings. In that shared silence, I felt the full force of the choices that had brought me here, the risks I had taken, and the distance I had traveled from the woman I once was. The hours stretched, time folding in on itself as I lay awake, haunted by memories and possibilities. I thought of my husband, of the life I had left behind and the consequences that waited in the wings. I wondered if forgiveness was possible, if redemption could be found amid the ruins of betrayal. His presence was both comforting and unsettling, a paradox that reflected the contradictions within me. In his eyes, I saw a mixture of understanding and reservation, a recognition of shared vulnerability that neither of us fully acknowledged. The night was a turning point, a crossroads where past loyalties collided with emerging truths. It forced me to confront the complexity of my desires and the price I was willing to pay for a chance at something different. As dawn approached, the quiet of the room seemed to amplify the noise in my heart, the doubts, the fears, and the faint glimmers of hope. I knew that what came next would demand courage and clarity, a willingness to face the fallout and redefine who I was. That night marked the end of innocence and the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with uncertainty, challenge, and the possibility of growth. And as the first light crept through the window, I made a silent vow to navigate the path ahead with honesty, whatever the cost. The day he found the messages was a fracture in time I still replay endlessly. I had left my phone unattended for just a moment, too long for fate to spare me. When I returned, the weight in the air told me everything before I even saw his face. His eyes were scanning, searching, and in that silence, I knew the barrier had been breached. He read the messages slowly, as if savoring each word like a bitter revelation. His breath grew shallow, his fingers trembling as they scrolled through conversations I thought were hidden forever. The quiet between us was deafening, filled with the ghosts of secrets I had tried to bury. There was no immediate confrontation, no shouting, no tears. Instead, a cold, heavy silence settled like a shroud. I could feel his confusion, his hurt mingling with disbelief. The man I had shared decades with seemed suddenly distant, as if a stranger had invaded the sanctuary of our shared life. Inside me, panic wrestled with regret. I knew the truth had come crashing down, but the full impact was yet to be understood. What shattered trust could be mended? Was there a path back from this abyss? The questions gnawed relentlessly. He didn't speak of anger, but his eyes told stories of loss and betrayal. Every glance was a reminder of the fragile thread on which our relationship now hung. The home that once felt like a refuge had transformed into a place of tension and unspoken accusations. My heart ached with the weight of what I had done. I saw myself reflected in his silence, flawed, vulnerable, desperate. The certainty of our past had dissolved into uncertainty, and the future was veiled in shadows. The day stretched long, each moment heavy with anticipation and dread. I watched him move through our home, a man grappling with new truths, while I wrestled with the consequences of my own choices. Though words were scarce, the emotional distance grew palpable. The foundation we had built trembled, shaken by the fragile revelation of a betrayal that neither of us wanted but both had to face. In that space between what was and what could be, I realized that the road ahead would demand more than forgiveness. It would require honesty, courage, and perhaps a redefinition of love itself. His message came without warning, a cold line severing the fragile thread that had bound us. He told me he was done, no explanations, no pleas, just a stark declaration that left me reeling. The man who had once been my confidant and companion now seemed a stranger, his words echoing like a final verdict in an empty room. The abruptness of his decision shattered the tentative hope I had clung to, exposing the raw wounds beneath my carefully constructed facade. I felt a profound loneliness settle deep within me, a stark contrast to the moments of connection that had briefly illuminated my days. I grappled with the weight of abandonment, questioning every choice that had led to this point. The love I thought enduring now seemed fragile and fleeting, vulnerable to the harsh truths I had uncovered. The man I had trusted to stand beside me was withdrawing, leaving a void that threatened to consume everything. The silence that followed his departure was deafening. I wandered through rooms filled with memories, the echoes of laughter and shared dreams now distant and hollow. Each familiar object became a reminder of what was lost, a testament to the fragility of human bonds. In the quiet, I confronted the stark reality of my situation. The choices I had made, the secrets I had kept, and the risks I had taken, all converged into a singular moment of reckoning. The future stretched before me, uncertain and daunting, demanding strength I was unsure I possessed. Yet, amid the despair, a flicker of resilience began to glow. The pain of loss was tempered by the possibility of renewal, a chance to rebuild not just my life but my understanding of love, trust, and self. The path ahead was uncharted, but it was mine to navigate. I knew the journey would be fraught with challenges and doubts, but surrender was no longer an option. The silence around me was no longer a tomb but a canvas, waiting for the brushstrokes of new beginnings and hard-earned wisdom. As I faced the solitude, I resolved to reclaim my voice, to confront the shadows of my past, and to seek a future defined not by betrayal but by growth and authenticity. The road was long and the night deep, but within me stirred a quiet flame, promising that I was not yet broken. The moment came quietly, without fanfare or dramatic confrontation. We sat across from each other, the room heavy with years of unspoken words and fractured trust. It was time to speak, to unravel the tangled threads of our past and confront the fragile present that lay between us. Our conversation began cautiously, each word measured and deliberate. We revisited memories both tender and painful, tracing the arc of our journey together. The weight of betrayal hung between us, a silent presence that shaped every glance and pause. He listened as I spoke, his eyes reflecting a complex mix of sorrow, confusion, and something resembling understanding. The years we had shared could not be erased, nor could the wounds inflicted, but beneath the surface, there was a flicker of hope, a possibility for healing, however tenuous. We navigated the difficult terrain of forgiveness and responsibility, acknowledging the pain while seeking a path forward. The dialogue was raw, honest, and at times uncomfortable, revealing depths of emotion long buried beneath routine and complacency. Amid the tension, moments of connection emerged, small gestures, a softened tone, the recognition of shared humanity. It was not reconciliation, not yet, but a step towards something new, an honest reckoning with the complexities of love and loss. The future remained uncertain, a landscape of choices fraught with risk and possibility. We both understood that the coming days would test the resilience of what remained and demand courage to rebuild or release what could no longer be sustained. As the conversation drew to a close, a quiet resolve settled between us. We would face the aftermath together, each carrying the scars and lessons of our past. The road ahead was unwritten, marked by questions that only time and truth could answer. In that shared silence, I found a measure of peace, not in certainty, but in the acknowledgement that even broken bonds can hold the promise of growth, and that love, in all its forms, is rarely simple or easy. This was not an ending, nor a beginning, but a moment suspended between both, a testament to the enduring complexity of human hearts and the paths we choose to follow.